Hello everyone, and a very good morning or afternoon depending on where you're joining us from today. Thank you very much for coming along to this webinar to discuss how you can transform blended learning at your institution. We should be taking about 45 minutes of your time today, including an opportunity for a designated question and answer session at the end. If you are familiar with the GoToMeeting software that we are using, you might know that there's a questions panel on the right-hand side of your screen. If you would like to ask questions as and when they occur to you, please feel free to type them up and send them over, and we're quite happy to take those as we're going through. We'll also be making a recording of the webinar available as well, so if you wish to view it again or share it with your colleagues, that will be an option for you. This will be available early next week. At the moment you're all on mute because the feedback can sometimes affect the quality of the sound, so if you do have any questions or issues you would like to raise, please do so in the questions panel on the right hand side of the screen. So firstly, just a couple of introductions. That's me, Sarah Vaughan, on the left hand side. I'm the events manager for Epigeum, and we're the organisation that puts together the online courses. A large part of my role is looking after our collaboration and implementation workshops, as well as our product launches and online events such as this. I'll let Professor Mark Brown, Jacqueline Downs, and then Leah Holroyd introduce themselves now.
Well, perhaps I'll jump in first.
Yes.
Mark Brown here. Some of you may know me from my time when I was in New Zealand. I'm currently the Director of the National Institute for Digital Learning at Dublin City University in Ireland.
Hi everybody, I'm Jacqueline Downs. I'm the Senior Project Editor at Epigeum. I'm mainly in charge now of author and editorial training. And I was the Senior Project Editor for the Blended Learning Programme that we're going to be talking about today.
Hi everyone, my name's Leah Holroyd. I previously worked for Epigeum, firstly as part of the editorial team and then as a learning consultant. But currently I'm working at the University of Canberra as an educational designer here.
Great, thank you everybody. So just a quick look at the agenda before we get started. First we'll look at Epigeum itself. We're the organisation that puts together the programmes through a collaborative model. And then we'll move on to Professor Mark Brown's presentation, who will discuss how blended learning can transform teaching at your institution. Following this, Jacqueline will provide you with a programme overview of blended learning and also a live demonstration. And then finally, Leah Holroyd will speak about approaches to blended learning and implementation at the University of Canberra. We will then wrap up with a question and answer session. As I mentioned in the beginning, please do feel free to type up your questions in the panel on the right-hand side as the webinar progresses. So, we were founded in 2005 as a spin-out originally from Imperial College London. Our two founders created the company in response to what they felt was a lack of timely support for researchers. One of our founders was doing a PhD at the time while working full-time, and he came across issues that he wanted and needed to be advised on. And it would either be that there would be a face-to-face course in 3 months' time that was being offered, or that there was inadequate, dated, or boring material online that didn't quite fit what he needed. So he saw this as an opportunity to work with universities to create supported materials for researchers, particularly PhD students and postdocs like himself, that gave just-in-time support for all those issues. And that's where we started, in the sort of research arena within higher education, and in the 10 years since we have expanded to studying programs, courses for students, and teaching and leadership programs for staff, of which this is one of. We were acquired by Oxford University Press in May of last year. Oxford University Press are actually a division of Oxford University, so we're still very much within the not-for-profit organisation in a higher education context and still very much focused on creating high-quality materials. To date, in the decade since we have been formed, we have created over 92 online courses across 19 different programs, and we have currently 7 in development. So we're an increasingly globally focused organisation and have worked with over 260 universities across 30 different countries worldwide to date. We have worked with many universities across Australia and New Zealand, I think over 30 institutions, and this is a map to show you what countries we have been involved with in the development of our courses. So now I'd like to hand over to Mark Brown, who will talk a little bit about how to transform blended learning at your institution. Mark, I'll make you the presenter now.
Well, hello everyone. My name is Mark Brown. I'm the Director of the National Institute for Digital Learning at Dublin City University in Ireland. I understand that we have a number of people from Australia and New Zealand who are probably listening to or participating in this webinar or the recording of it, and so there may be some of you who know me reasonably well from the time when I was in New Zealand at Massey University as in my last role before I left the Director of the National Centre for Teaching and Learning. Here I'm just going to talk for a short period because I think what's really important in the context of the courses that have been developed through Epigeum is to see some of the courses. I think that's probably much more interesting. But I do want to take the opportunity just to put the courses that have been developed into a little bit of a context, of both theoretical and a policy level context, if you like. And the short presentation, I've given the title of, or the subtitle really, in terms of blended learning or the potential of blended learning, from an old treasure to better future. Some of you may be aware that I've actually borrowed that term from a report that was published at the beginning of 2016, a report by Sir John Daniel. Sir John is well known in the field of online distance education, recently retired as the President of the Commonwealth of Learning. This report, commissioned by Contact North in Canada, is a very, very nice, very simple, without being simplistic, overview of the literature, and if you like to borrow the title from the report, Making Sense of Blended Learning. And it really identifies some of the opportunities but also challenges in this distinction between whether blended learning as a concept will be borrowed drawing on traditional models of pedagogy, or we'll look at ways in which it can be used in a more transformative sense. And I think that's captured in this quote here about the opportunities that blended learning brings as distinct from being a threat. But that's very much dependent on the type of institution and institutional leaders you have as to whether you really want to harness the potential of blended learning as distinct from tame it according to your institutional culture or more traditional understandings or models of teaching and learning. If you're not familiar with this report, the reason I'm just really starting with it, it is one that we feature in the course material, but it would be one that I'd recommend that you go and read and perhaps even share with some of those people in your institution who are in leadership roles, because it's not a long report, and it does a very good job in relatively lay language laying out some of the opportunities but also challenges. In the remaining time I've got, I just want to cover three things. I want to just touch on why we set out on this blended learning course, why it came about, why blended learning. Then I want to give you just a taste of the kind of thinking that has underpinned or informed the development and in the course itself. I'm referring here more to the kind of principles that we've worked off from the start right through that we hope are explicitly woven throughout the course materials and the way we would see it being implemented. And then on that last part about implementation, that's really important when you think about, or if you've already committed to the Epigeum blended learning or we've had experience with Epigeum in the past, you'll appreciate how you go about implementing it, the way it fits strategically in your institution should not just be taken for granted. That's something you have to plan for and plan for as early as you can. I'll just touch on that at the end, but that's the general roadmap for the next perhaps 10 minutes. So why blended learning? I've been involved with Epigeum for probably a decade now, almost since their inception, and I've been involved in a number of courses from leadership development for higher educators to a course, a very early course on online learning. And sometimes we confuse online learning with blended learning because these words don't necessarily get used with precise definitions. In this context, the frame of reference for blended learning is the assumption that we are producing or have developed professional development materials for people who are working in a more traditional campus situation. Not necessarily traditional institutions, but the assumption is that the prime mode of delivery will be where students do have a campus opportunity for interaction. And it's about the way in which we can then enhance that more traditional approach, which can be very innovative and contemporary, I should add, so maybe traditional is not quite the right word, enhance it through the use of new technologies. So to just make that absolutely clear, when we set out to develop this material, unlike some of the other courses, this was not about creating a program of professional development for staff to create fully online programs to expand the offerings to students who might live off campus. It was addressing this niche around what we do for on-campus interaction. And I guess if I want to be a little cynical, go beyond merely just the use of PowerPoint in lectures as a form of blended learning. And that really reflects the fact that in today's age, over even as recently the last 3 to 5 years, the range of choices that we now have available to us in terms of learning design, if we understand that designs for learning are things that we make explicit choices about just simply because there are so many more technologies, but there are also perhaps as much more maturity around the different forms of pedagogy that we can choose. So this was about trying to unpack, if you like, and explore some of the complexity of those choices and helping lecturers understand which are the right choices or solutions for the right types of learners and the right types of learning outcomes that you're looking to achieve. And then the last point on this slide that is also important is that we didn't want to just simply use technology to do what's always been done. I guess there's a place to enhance in that small incremental way, but we wanted to weave throughout the professional development the sense that we can do things differently fundamentally to help transform the student experience. And I really focus heavily here on the student or the learning experience in ways that can not only lead to much greater levels of engagement, higher levels of completion, but ideally high levels of achievement as well because of the quality of what we might be doing with our learners. So that transformative element was something we didn't want to lose sight of. A lot of that, of course, comes down to the last point I'm going to touch on in terms of your institutional culture and how you implement all of this. But that's why we set out to do what we did. I've given a little taste of cynicism about blended learning with my reference to PowerPoint, and I've just got a slightly trite, perhaps over-borrowed or extended metaphor I'll use for the next few slides or for the next 5 minutes, borrowing on dance. See, for me and my experience in the institutions that I get the privilege to work with and work with colleagues at, there's a lot of shadow dancing goes on when it comes to blended learning. A lot of people think they're already doing it. I think they're doing it well. Typically it's not defined what it is, and I'm not sure they're doing anything that's particularly new because blended learning has really been around for a very long time. So there's not necessarily the appetite to really drill down and ask serious and critical questions about whether there's a true return on investment, that there is truly a transformative gain, return, if you like, in some form, particularly for learners. Equally, there's a lot of line dancing going on. I did say that this will be a bit trite as a metaphor, as you'll see, but a lot of line dancing because, for my mind, blended learning is not going to look the same in each module or unit or each program of study. By its very nature, learning is a very messy process, and the solutions and choices that you make will be unique to your learners, your discipline, the type of philosophy you bring as a teacher. So I think I particularly wanted in providing advice around the development of this suite of blended learning professional development modules to bring much more creative flair, if you like, to our thinking about blended learning, not to dismiss those of you who might be fans of line dancing. If I go back to a fundamental, very seminal publication from 1998 in the Educational Researcher, probably for me the most influential publication in the subject in their field of education. This quote here, I won't read it in entirety, you can read it for yourself on the screen, but theoretical exclusivity and single-minded thinking, the idea that there is one single educational theory or one single methodology for teaching is doomed to fail. It's a much more complex process than that. And hence we needed to capture that in the way we have produced the materials, in the way we understand what blended learning is all about, such that people can then, within a framework, make their own decisions about what type of experience, what type of blend is most appropriate for their learners or their institutional context. But similarly, if I take this metaphor of dance a little bit further, and perhaps it goes beyond just blended learning, I think the field of utilising new technologies in education suffers from a lot of the flash mob We get excited about the next big thing that comes along, and there is a sense in which at one point blended learning was the next big thing. I think we're now much more mature here, and of course the flash mob, it's very exciting, it perhaps engages lots of people spontaneously, captures their enthusiasm, but it disappears very quickly as well, and that would not be a measure of success or impact, particularly around any professional development you might be embarking on in this area, or what we were trying to create, something much more sustainable with more depth to it. So I probably won't spend too long on these slides, and I'll just bring the full slide up on the screen. Basically, I think if we're not careful, blended learning has become, or might already be, mean all things to all people with different particular interpretations. In some respects, because it's such a broad concept, it's almost inevitable that's what it is. But the key point is we don't want it to be, as the second, the bottom part of the quote or comment here, just an extension of the old normal of the sort of classic slow dance of really slow improvements perhaps, and sometimes they're not always improvements. We really wanted to, as I said earlier, have a much more transformative dimension, not to dismiss the art of the waltz, if you like. And those of you who know that I was originally from New Zealand, I guess tongue-in-cheek here, what we were trying to do is have a dance, if I push this right to its extreme now as a metaphor, that was much more bold and bodacious in our thinking and more challenging and confronting in our understandings of pedagogy, particularly traditional pedagogy, and the way that we could use new technologies to be much more transformative, in danger of repeating myself. So moving into the second part, and I won't take as long with these last two sections, just in terms of give you a sense of our philosophy and guiding principles. There are really two elements to talking about the guiding principles underpinning the professional development. First is our assumptions about professional development itself, or I prefer to use the word professional learning here. We were working on the basis that all teachers are learners, or all lecturers, if you like, are learners, and even those most experienced, we were designing something that even on the assumption that they have experience in this area can still benefit and learn from reflecting more carefully and critically about what they're doing. Not just the novice teachers, the beginning teachers, or those who are just embarking. So we were trying to speak to different audiences. We also were very respectful, or tried to be very respectful, that people come from a diverse range of backgrounds culturally, but also in terms of discipline differences. And we should not underestimate how important those differences are at the discipline level, putting aside perhaps differences from undergrad to postgrad in what is an appropriate learning experience for particular learners. And then another principle around professional learning is that if it's not meaningful, if it's not authentic, if it's not something that actually speaks to the learner, in this case the academic, that they can apply in their own work, if you like, if it's like a decontextualized workshop, to go back to another age of perhaps where professional development was the one-act wonder, we were trying to avoid that. Really, that's why the ability to customize and make the Epigeum material flexible and fitting in your own institution is one of its greatest strengths, subject to then taking the effort to ensuring that you do that customization or making it fit in your institutional context. But that's kind of our understanding about what we were trying to do professionally in terms of providing professional development, drawing on contemporary literature. The second set of guiding principles were more about blended learning itself, and when Jackie talks about the course, gives you a little demonstration. What I don't think you'll probably see these as explicit as they are on this slide, but they do actually come up in the course in a number of places. We in the end just tried to keep the course to some degree as keep it simple, stupid. You don't want the professional development to be ridden with education speak for people who are not educators, drawing on that theory. So we tried to just keep our principles down to these 5 core elements. About blended learning, you heard me refer to at the outset, about making choices, making those choices explicit, not just doing things as they've always been done, That's a cornerstone of a key principle of blended learning. The importance of adding variety and flexibility to the learning experience, not only for the learner, but also in some respects for the teacher as well. And so we've tried to weave examples of variety and flexibility that isn't just there for novel or fad reasons, but to truly add value. The concept of wrapping is very important in the blended learning literature. This is about wrapping the face-to-face experience, whether that be lecturing or tutorials or labs or crits, then with the online blended elements, the digital dimensions as well. So having the wrapping done really explicitly. Substitution is a crucial principle, because if all you end up doing, and this has been perhaps the default model for both blended and online learning, is add more things to the curriculum, more activities, and not take something away, not explicitly design for learning, and just do this bolt-on model, you can do a great disservice for your learners. And you could even get to the point, as we know from some of the literature, jeopardize your completion rates, because the learner doesn't know that they don't have to do everything unless you make it very clear. So substituting some things when they are better. And of course, the digital dimension, if you like, is not always better than the traditional. And then lastly, the last principle that is woven throughout explicitly is that all of this is packaged in a way that is purposeful. It's done deliberately. It's done with thought and consideration, following all of those other principles. In the literature, there are lots of other principles, and we do point you, people who work through the course, to some of the other publications. But this was just to kind of wrap it around something that we thought was reasonably tangible. If I bring it all back together around the performance or the art of in science and dancing, I suppose the thought here is that blended learning has a creative and visionary dimension, and in many respects the learning designer, in this case the teacher, the lecturer, but perhaps in partnership with educational developers and others, it's a process of harnessing that talent out of a diverse mix of learners to produce something that's truly inspiring and a great performance. I should probably move on that note. Very lastly, strategic fit. I've perhaps already said enough on this, so I'll just bring up 3 points and then probably bring things to a wrap. What you do need to know right from the start, based on the experience, not only my own experience, Epigeum's experience, and experience of those who have used Epigeum professional development in the past, just because you have the material does not solve the problems that you might be expecting to solve. It's not a quick fix. It needs, as I've already indicated, careful consideration about where it fits alongside all of the other professional development that you offer, how you can give it integrity, authenticity, how you can give it currency within your professional development suite of offerings. Ideally, it needs to be integrated, not an add-on. And this is really not rocket science, to be honest. But that should be something you think about well in advance of, even if you're at a situation where you're about to purchase or considering to make a purchase, or I prefer to see of it, not a purchase, you're actually entering into a partnership with Epigeum, because in this whole area around strategic fit, over the time I've worked with them, they've actually become very capable, based on what they have seen other institutions do, good and bad, in providing you advice and guidance, and even in many instances a guide of how to successfully use the materials. It's one thing having them, it's another thing knowing how to make them work. But that's very localized. But perhaps the last point that's important is it needs to align with your strategic drivers. The more that you're able to make the connections to your, perhaps people have different language, but it might be a teaching and learning strategy. It may be even that you have a digital strategy, or you may even have a blended learning strategy, but the more you're able to demonstrate that kind of strategic alignment, ideally I've been at my previous institution where we had the Vice Chancellor do a short video introducing the material, which really gave it that credibility. So those are just some things around the strategic fit, because I would not want to misrepresent what is available, particularly in light of the fact, perhaps this wasn't scripted, there are now other forms of professional development emerging. Some of you might be familiar with the fact that there are MOOCs available for our staff in how to design online learning, blended learning and so forth. The big difference here is that this is targeted strategically as a suite of materials. It's not something someone does just by themselves because they think it might be interesting to do a MOOC on blended learning. And there's a call to action, ideally, in the way that you build this in around its strategic alignment. With an eye on the time, my very final slide is that if you don't bring that strategic fit as a mindset, then you're highly likely to end up with something looking like this, which I'm sure is not the goal that you would have in mind. And I say that obviously with my tongue in cheek here. That's probably all I wanted to say. I probably talked a little longer than I anticipated, so now I'm just going to hand over and give you the opportunity to have a look at some of the actual courses that have been developed, and I hope that you find like my introductory comments interesting and useful, and then more importantly the courses themselves, and there'll be an opportunity, I understand, for questions at the end. Thanks.
Hi everybody, thank you for listening. I'm Jackie Downs, I'm the Senior Editor for Author and Editorial Training, and I was the Programme Manager for the Blended Learning Programme, so I'm just going to talk you through some of the key points for it. So just as you can see here, when we created the Blended Learning Programme, what we tried to do is bring together a group of leading experts and universities who will be able to share their best practice in blended learning. There's a focus on the use of technology in it as well, and the idea is that we want to bridge that gap that's between strategy and delivery by getting lecturers to be able to translate the theory, the principles, the aims of blended learning into a more effective teaching and learning practice. So the Blended Learning Programme, as you can see here, it's aimed to give lecturers and faculty who are considering that blended learning approach in their teaching, those who want to improve their skills and have an understanding of how to combine face-to-face with online teaching and assessment. There are 7 courses in the whole programme, and each course has between 2 and 4 modules, and it builds on the previous course. So it is designed to be taken in order, but participants are able to choose the order really that they want to take based on their own experience and their requirements. And it's developed with our partners from the UK, from Germany, Oslo, the Republic of Ireland, Canada, Kuwait and Australia. So we've got 7 courses here. I won't read through all the titles for you, but these are the names of the 7 courses. And in total, the whole programme is about 12.5 hours, which seems like a lot, but it's actually not designed to be taken consecutively with no break in between. And in fact, most of the courses, because they'd be suitable for a different kind of audience, they're more designed to be taken over a longer period of time. So whilst the same people might take the second course, Approaches to Blended Learning, because it's full of case studies that will be valuable to anybody, the other courses might be more suitable for people at different stages in their career. So the first course, Why Blend, will be a bit more suitable for those who are either just beginning or who just want to refresh their memories of the different theories and practices around blended learning. The third course, Innovating with Blended Learning, is really suitable for people taking those first steps. And then there's a progression through with people who want to develop and implement a whole course approach to blended learning, and they could then take course 4. Those who are interested in looking at either redesigning assessment for blended learning or evaluating and refining their blended courses can take courses 5 and 6. And then that final course is really for people who are looking to roll out blended learning across a whole department or faculty or institution. So depending on the stage of your career or depending what your requirements are, you can mix and match the courses accordingly. So some key features of the Blended Learning Programme. We've got a lot of practical tips and activities. So we've got checklists, video scripts, video material, plus a lot of activities that help model different approaches and engage participants in the blended learning. There's case studies. The focus of course 2 is entirely case study approaches, but then there are other incidences of using case studies throughout as well. And then there's an awful lot of video interviews with experts talking about their own understanding of blended learning approaches and giving tips and advice on different strategies that they've used. Great, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take you through some of the different screens for the Blended Learning Programme and just a couple of general points first of all. There are, as I said earlier, just a lot of opportunities for active engagement in the form of note making, text entry, reflections, close activities, classifications, lots of things that in doing these activities will bring about practical tips for the user so that they can actually create materials as well. A lot of videos, as I mentioned, where academics will discuss related topics and offer tips and advice, and a lot of presentational activities too, so that the authors can communicate necessary information using checklists and labelled graphics and sliders, for example. So this first screen that I'm going to show is from the first course, Why Blend? And it features a lot of our typical Epigeum elements. So for example, up here we've got the time that just estimates how long it might take somebody to get through the course. And we've also got here on the right hand side a couple of pods. These are useful advice pods in this instance, but if I go down a bit further, you can see we also have a video pod. This is where academics are talking about different aspects of blended learning, what it means to them. And we've also got a portfolio activity, and there's a lot of hours, over 26 hours worth actually, of extra activities. And the user doesn't have to do these activities, but they are a really interesting way for them to develop what they've learned from the main screen and build up a portfolio of material. So if I take you now just to the main screen, you can also see we've got our key takeaways. So these are the elements that somebody should really come away with when they've completed the screen. We have those on every screen. And this is a screen that's about substitution. It's about how people creating a blended course shouldn't just add more technology and more approaches to their existing course, but they should substitute. So they take away some of the traditional material and replace it instead with some online learning. And I'm just going to show you one of the key features of this course, this screen, which is this animation that illustrates exactly how they might do that. So I'll just play a few seconds of that for you.
I used to teach in a traditional way. Over the course of a semester, I'd usually have one lecture and one tutorial a week. But once I started a more blended approach, the structure of my course became more flexible. You can see from the design that in weeks 3 and 9, I decided.
Okay, so that gives you an idea of how that works, with the animation and the voiceover. And with every audio or video that we include in Epigeum programs, we also have a transcript, as you can see there, so that people can make sure they can follow what's being said. This screen also features glossary. We just click on the highlighted terms and a box will pop up giving us that glossary definition, and that's something that's featured throughout the blended learning program. And then the final activity on this screen is a note-making activity. So it just allows the user to type something in, and they can also get feedback from this as well, as you can see, and they can just move through the questions, view a summary, select what they've typed and print it out as well. So this screen is from course 4, developing and implementing a whole course approach to blended learning, and as you can see again we've got some good pods down the side here, some useful links and useful advice pods. If we just look on the main screen, the screen is all about frameworks. So this first activity here offers the opportunity for users to look at different frameworks, get some information about them, and then we follow it with the only comic strip that we've got in the whole of the blended learning program, where we follow a lecturer as he applies how he could use aspects of the 3E framework with different learners. So each panel just follows the different groups of learners that the lecturer might be dealing with, and we follow his thought process as he considers those different elements. And then down here we can learn more about one of the particular frameworks, the 7Cs framework, and this useful links pod here. So it gives us again all these different links and some information about them. From Course 5, the Redesigning Assessment for Blended Learning course of the programme, we've got a really visually interesting screen here that has some different features to the ones that you've seen before in the form of this Your Context pod. In its default mode, a Your Context pod will encourage students to find out about their institutional or development guidelines and so on in relation to a particular learning point. But these pods are customisable so that universities can insert institution-specific text or links to different resources so that their students have all the necessary information to hand. There's also a download pod here so that a particular article that's relevant to the screen can be downloaded. And then as you can see, we've got more glossary terms here where we click on the highlighted word and that key term is defined for us. And what's really lovely about this screen is it includes one of our really good bespoke activities. First of all, the screen will give us a couple of examples of a particular assessment strategy. It looks at a more traditional strategy and then follows it with a more alternative assessment pattern. And what we've got here is a timeline, if I just take you down to that was developed from scratch by our development team. And what it allows users to do is, having learned information from those two diagrams that I've just shown you, they can apply that to this activity so that they can create their own assessment timeline. And how that works is they click on each box, they type something in, so I'll just click on a few. They would just be typing some particular assessment strategy or approach that they wanted to take into each of these boxes. There's 4 boxes, as you can see, in 3 columns, all representing low, medium and high stakes kinds of assessment strategies. And then they can move the circle so that they can place it anywhere they want on the timeline. So each notch of the timeline represents a different week. When they've done that with all of them, so with all of these different 12 different coloured circles, they can then view a summary, they can select their material and then they can print it, so that what they end up with is a really useful assessment timeline of their own. And it's just another example of a practical activity that will get them to think very carefully about the strategies that they use. And then the final screen that I'm going to show you is another screen with lots of practical tips and advice on it, in this instance about surveys. So there are some useful links pods that give the user information about different survey tools that they might use. And there's some different activities, in this instance what we call a flashcard activity. And this is just to give different information to the user. And then probably the most substantial activity on this screen, and the activity that offers yet another opportunity for people to think very carefully about practical ways that they might find out how their courses are being evaluated by students and by other users, is we've got this scenario activity that gives us a scenario based on a survey created by a teacher. It encourages the participants of the blended learning programme to really think about the survey and to analyse it and to type their comments into a box and whatever they feel about this survey, and then they can get some feedback on it, and then they can move forward to the next one, which is a different kind of survey, in this instance an online survey, where they can go through the same process of writing in their text into the box here and getting some feedback. And all of that again is going to provide useful tips so that people who need to evaluate their blended learning programme or their blended learning course, they can see how well it's going by using these particular kinds of surveys. So that's the last screen that I'm going to show you, and if I just wrap it up by making just a couple of other general comments, general points for you. All the courses include a practice scenario at the end of them. So that's an opportunity for the participant to do a slightly more developed activity or a couple of activities based on the content of each course. There are also summary screens, which includes all the key points from the course collated onto one document, and it ties everything together in a more general and summative way, and as well as giving ideas of what to do next. And every course except course 2 also has a course quiz, where there are randomised MCQs for participants to take just to check their learning. So thanks for listening. I hope that's given you a good taste of the content and some of the pedagogical features, and we'll look forward to hearing if you've got any questions.
Thanks, Jackie.
Hi everyone. My name's Leah Holroyd, and I'm currently working as an educational designer within the teaching and learning team at the University of Canberra. Before that, I worked for Epigeum, first as a member of the editorial team and then as senior learning consultant, so working with universities on their implementation strategies for using the Epigeum online courses. And somehow in between those two jobs, I found time to work as a freelancer and author one of the blended learning courses, and that's the course called Approaches to Blended Learning. So I'm going to be wearing a couple of different hats in my part of the presentation. Firstly, I'll give you some author perspectives on the course that I wrote, and then I'll share a few ideas around how we might implement the blended learning courses at the University of Canberra. Okay, so first of all, looking at the Approaches to Blended Learning course. This course is a bit different to the other courses in the blended learning program in that it's really a collection of case studies. And what I tried to do in authoring this course was to bring together quite a range of different case studies. So we've got examples of blended learning from a range of different disciplines, a range of different universities around the world, and some different approaches, some different models for people to look at. So I've listed the case studies there. The first two case studies are really focused more on the process of creating online learning resources as part of a blended learning approach. So there's an example of video scenarios with a cast of actors that were produced to help radiography students learn how to interact with patients. And there's also an example from the field of immunology which uses some interactive learning objects, narrated animations and quizzes and that type of thing. Then in terms of the other case studies, we've got one that looks at Facebook as a discussion forum and the challenges that that might present. One that looks at giving students choice in terms of the types of activities that they take part in as part of their blended curriculum. So actually allowing students to vote on whether they want to listen to a lecture, take part in a discussion group, do a simulated or competitive activity, that type of thing. Then we've got a really nice example from the University of Queensland, which is a first-year engineering cohort, over 1,000 students. And in terms of the online component there, they're looking through very short mini lectures and doing some online activities. And then in the face-to-face sessions, they're working in groups on real-world problems. So there are some great ideas there. The projects that they work on include things like building robotic devices to detect landmines, working on environmentally friendly sewage systems, flood defences for areas of Australia that have really severe weather conditions and so on. And then finally there's an example that involves two universities, one in Ireland and one in the US, and that's looking in particular at how these two groups engage with each other through online discussion forums and collaborative activities. So the two groups of students there not only come from different institutions, different countries, but they also come from different subject areas. So one group is studying psychology and the other group is studying international relations and politics. And in that particular unit, they're talking in particular about terrorism and different theories of terrorism. So that's a really interesting example of how different groups can engage together as part of a blended program. So that's an overview of the course content. I thought I'd just say a few words about how I imagine this course might be used. So although it's I think listed as the second course in the program, I actually think it would work really well as an introduction to blended learning for people who perhaps aren't so familiar with it, who are quite new in this particular space. And the reason is, as I've said, it contains a range of different case studies, and it's a really good way to show people the advantages of blended learning and what blended learning actually looks like in practice. So I would hope that it could inspire staff, give staff some really good ideas and help them visualize what blended learning might look like in their own context before they move on to the other courses that go more into the theoretical side of things and the more practical details of actually moving towards a blended learning approach. As with all the courses in the program, this course has a number of portfolio activities. So these are reflective or written assignments. And in this course, what we've tried to do with those portfolio activities is to encourage people to extract particular ideas from the case studies presented and evaluate them and decide whether they could apply some of those ideas in their own teaching. So I mentioned before there's study that looks at the use of Facebook, and I know from speaking to universities that that's a slightly controversial topic, I suppose. Some universities, most universities have very clear guidelines on what you can and can't do in terms of social media, strict guidelines on how you use social media with your students. And there are some universities where you just wouldn't be able to use Facebook with students. But so the idea there is to read that case study and consider the way that Facebook has been used and to decide whether perhaps there are other tools, other technologies that you could use in a similar way. So here we have academics who use Twitter with their students or other social media platforms. Or someone might read that case study and decide that actually they could use a good old-fashioned discussion forum in Moodle or Blackboard to do the same kinds of activities. So it's all about looking through the case studies and selecting certain elements that seem most appropriate and finding ways to embed those into your existing practice. I also think that this course, the case studies in this course, could be a useful resource for workshops. So the teaching and learning team here at UC that I'm part of regularly runs workshops for teams of teachers, people from particular faculties, particular disciplines, who are looking to move towards a different approach. And so these case studies are certainly something that we could refer to give those people examples while we're working with them. And finally, I just thought I'd mention the fact that Epigeum courses can be customized. So one thing that you could do in terms of this particular course is to add in your own case study from your own institution, and that can help to make the course feel a bit more tailored towards staff at your university. Okay, moving on then to look at our implementation plans at UC. So obviously the blended learning program has only been released quite recently, so we're still definitely in the early stages of implementation. But I thought it was worth mentioning that UC already has a license for another Epigeum program called University and College Teaching, which some of you might be familiar with. So when I arrived here a few months ago, the university already had this Epigeum program, and as a lot of universities do, we've got as far as uploading the courses onto a Moodle site. There was some basic information there, a summary of the topics covered in each course, and there had been some light promotion. So for example, we have a newsletter that goes out every month or so, and we'd included this there. So I made a few additions when I arrived, adding some information on the fact that these courses have been approved by the HEA, and also explaining to staff how they fitted in with some of the other staff development activities that we're already running here at the university. So just to give a bit more context around these courses. So that was our experience with UCT. When blended learning was released, we really wanted to find a way of integrating the new courses into existing activities, existing development opportunities. And I thought I'd just take a few minutes to talk about the Graduate Certificate in Tertiary Education, which we just launched earlier this month. So the new GCTE, we think we've taken quite a new approach here. The idea is that the GCTE is very flexible and very personalized. So someone who comes into this course would complete self-audit of their existing experience, their existing capabilities, And in the process of doing that, they'll identify certain areas that they want to develop. We've got 5 focus areas, which you can see on the screen there, and we're asking our staff to provide evidence of development in each of those 5 focus areas, acknowledging the fact that some of the activities that staff do here may well contribute to more than one of those focus areas. So for example, if we have a member of teaching staff who is going through a reaccreditation from an external body, perhaps going through a large-scale curriculum redesign, then the chances are that they're already thinking about new strategies to engage their students. They might be redesigning the assessment and taking a look at feedback practices. They'll be using Moodle, which is our LMS here, so they'll be thinking about flexible learning environments and so on. And we decided that we would use the university and college teaching courses and the blended learning courses as resources within the GCTE. So not everyone will use those resources. As I said, it's very flexible and personalized, so it's up to each individual participant in the course to decide which resources they want to engage with, which path they're going to follow. And because this course has, this new version of the course has only just launched, it's very early days, and I don't have any analytics to share at this point, but we would imagine those UCT and blended learning courses being particularly useful for staff who are quite new to teaching. So the kinds of staff that perhaps want a more structured, a more scaffolded approach, the UCT and blended learning courses lend themselves really well, I think, to that type of audience. So the idea is that staff can engage with those courses, those Epigeum packages, and in doing so they'll pick up some new ideas and they'll implement those in their own teaching. They'll generate evidence, they'll write their narrative, and at the end of this process of undertaking activities and generating evidence, the final assessment piece for the GCTE is to write an account of professional practice, which is a sort of personal, reflective narrative tying together all the different activities, all the different pieces of evidence that they've produced over the course of this process. And the way that we've designed it, we've modeled our template for that account of professional practice on the template provided by the Higher Education Academy for applications for fellowship. So the idea is that anyone who wants to, once they've done that APP, they can get their graduate certificate, and then they can also submit the APP to the HEA along with a couple of references and hopefully get themselves a fellowship into the bargain. So it's really a two for the price of one type approach that we've gone for. So just a bit more detail on how the Epigeum courses have been embedded into the grad cert. At the moment we've uploaded the courses without any customization, and that's subject to review. I did have a go at customizing the Epigeum courses when I first arrived, when we were still trying to decide what approach to take, and I'm happy to say that it was a pretty straightforward process, and the Epigeum team provided some technical support, which was really useful. So I guess it's good to know that further down the track, if we decide to customize the courses, we will be able to go ahead and do that. But I think we felt at this stage that the best thing to do was to put the courses online as they are, and just to wait and get some feedback, get some analytics, see how many people decided to engage with them, and then later on we can decide whether we need to perhaps break them down into smaller chunks, whether we need to tailor them by adding some extra content or removing content if it's perhaps not quite pitched at the right level, for example. So that's something that we'll review once the grad cert has been up and running for a little bit longer. A couple of colleagues pointed out that a lot of our teaching staff will not have heard of Epigeum. So one thing I did to try and address that was I added an entry on Epigeum to the glossary within our Moodle site, which just explains what Epigeum is, the fact that they collaborate with universities. There's a link in there to the Epigeum website and also to a video giving the story of Epigeum. So that's just some framing information for people that want to know where these courses have come from. And also in terms of framing, whenever we've signposted people towards the Epigeum courses, we've also given quite clear instructions. So if there's a particular part of the course that we think is especially relevant for a particular focus area, then we've flagged that. If there's a particular portfolio activity that we think people should complete, then we've pointed that out. But also, we've invited people to be critical. As with any of the resources that we've included in this graduate certificate course, there are a range of resources for people to engage with, and we are expecting people to be reflective, to be critical, to decide whether the things that they're reading are appropriate for their context, and what issues might be raised if they tried to implement some of these ideas in their own teaching. So for us, that's all part of being a reflective practitioner and engaging in the scholarship of teaching and learning. So we're not presenting the Epigeum courses as gospel truth. It's something, there's something that are there to be engaged with, to be analysed and to be used as they're helpful, I suppose. And finally, just to mention that at this point we're not using the multiple choice quizzes that came with the blended learning package. The reason for that is that within the context of the graduate certificate, we're really just interested in the evidence that people ultimately generate towards the learning outcomes for our GCTE. So yeah, we're not really interested in whether people can get 10 out of 10 on a quiz at this stage. Again, that's something that we might review if the feedback from people taking part in the course is that it would actually be useful to have those quizzes there as a kind of self-check on how well they've understood the material. So again, that's something that we can review and adjust as we need to further down the track. And finally, I mentioned before that I could see these courses being useful as a resource to use in workshops. As an educational designer, I provide a lot of at-elbow support. I'm working in particular with the health faculty here. So I work with academics who are designing new courses, new units, or redesigning existing offerings. People who have been teaching for a few years and want to take another look at the way that they teach, maybe consider moving more of their content online. People who are undergoing a review of their courses or going through a reaccreditation process. We have a team of nursing teachers that are going through that at the moment, and so we're talking to them about blended and flexible delivery as part of that. So there are all sorts of examples of this type of support that we run here at UC, whether it's group workshops for teaching teams or one-to-one support. And I definitely think that the Epigeum courses can be a really useful part of that, whether it's pulling out a particular case study that seems very relevant, or working through some of those activities that take you through the various steps of carrying out an evaluation, for example, or looking at redesigning assessment. So we'll definitely be using some of the activities within the courses to help support people through all of those types of processes. Okay, I think that's it from me. Please feel free to get in touch with any questions, and I hope that's been helpful.
Thanks, Leah. So I'd like to just wrap up now with our contact details here. So you can see our email address and our website link here. Some of you have already been in touch with us in regards to the Blending Learning program, and we can give you a lot more detail in regards to pricing and implementation of the program at your institution. So please do contact us if you have any questions. We will also be able to provide you with a free trial of Blended Learning. So if you are interested in accessing the program yourself, please do drop us an email. We will also be sending a recording out of this presentation to you so you can share it with the relevant colleagues who may find this of interest. So thank you very much for attending this webinar today. If you do have any questions, please feel free to send us an email, and I hope you all have a good rest of the day. Thank you to all the speakers as well. Goodbye.